The Radical Secular Podcast, a demand for justice, equality, and rational public policy. Subscribe at YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and all the major podcast channels. Visit our website at theradicalsecular.com for articles, insights, and our complete library of episodes. Support us on Patreon, and follow us on social media.
Welcome to the Radical Secular Podcast. I'm Sean Prophet.
And I'm Joe Gipinti.
Today we're going to bring you a special one-on-one interview segment I did with anti-disinformation and anti-fascist activist Jim Stewartson. We'll be covering a wide range of topics, including the outrageous not guilty verdict in the Rittenhouse trial. We'll also be talking about retired General Michael Flynn, who made the outrageous and anti-democratic statement that, quote, if we are going to have one nation under God, which we must, we have to have one religion, one nation under God, and one religion under God, right? All of us working together, end quote. We're getting more and more used to these kinds of flagrant statements of anti-democratic purpose on the right. We get several of these every week now from what used to be the lunatic fringe and has now become mainstream. Yes, Flynn was roundly condemned in the press for what he said. But outside the mainstream, a growing number of Americans are responding to these provocations with increasingly un-American enthusiasm. We're going to talk today about how we got here. But first, I want to remind you to make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends to listen. And please head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/theradicalsecular. We'd really appreciate your support, even if it's just buying us a cup of coffee every month. We have support tiers from $3 a month on up. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. We also publish new articles weekly in our journal at theradicalsecular.com. Okay, let's get right into our t-shirts. Joe, what do you got today?
You know, I was wondering what to wear today, and I thought maybe I'd wear like this like Unity shirt, but no, that wasn't really the mood. So I decided to wear my old MMA shirt. Hey.
Yes, I concur with that.
Now,
and
I used to do MMA. I started to stop because of shoulder issues, and I switched to Aikido. But we need to talk more about that. How to approach the times that we live in, and we need to start thinking about how to survive through this, both on an emotional level and a social level, and on a real level, right? And not to get too dramatic about it, but I think what we're facing is pretty dire, and we're going to talk about that today, I think.
Yeah, and we have to live in the world that is not the world we all wish existed. And more I've been coming to that. And my shirt today has...
Yeah.
I've worn this before, but it's more appropriate now than ever. And that is that we cannot cede the ground of our public square to fascism. We have to confront it in whatever way it's necessary. And so we will be talking about that a little bit later, but I want to talk more. I want to start by talking more just globally, generally about what we are facing. And so, as most of you are no doubt painfully aware, our nation and our global democracy are under a furious withering and sustained attack from reactionary forces. Michael Flynn is in the vanguard of those forces. His statement about having only one religion is both chilling and entirely unsurprising because right now, the very worst elements of American Christianity are melding in purposeful and strategic ways with the forces of wealth and autocracy to not only destroy democracy, but also to eliminate all traces of freedom of conscience and religion. This is nothing less than a full frontal assault on secularism. So let's dig in. We've talked about General Flynn on several episodes recently, and I'm sure he'll be an ongoing topic for us and really for anyone who cares about the continuance of the American experiment in democracy and pluralism, because Flynn is turning out to be a massive and growing threat. Has anyone considered the horrifying prospect that he might run for president in 2024? He's way worse than Trump. The right loves him, and I hate to say it, but he could win. More and more, the right is using a sophisticated and weaponized disinformation and psyops to blind and confuse Americans out of what used to be common sense definitions of who we are as a nation, what we stand for, and more importantly, what we won't stand for. And Michael Flynn and his minions are ass deep in that project. The average person has no idea what's going on. They're still stuck in old definitions of right versus left, moderate versus extremist, Democrat versus Republican, religious versus secular. And they still think we live in a nation under the rule of law, which is at this point becoming more and more untenable to hold that viewpoint. So they don't know what's in the works. They don't understand the stakes of this battle. Their minds have been so quickly and relentlessly colonized by disinfo that even those who should know better are increasingly willing to fight on enemy turf and lose. Because trust me, if you're thinking in terms of 20th century American politics, you're losing. The new American theocracy of disinformation is an offshoot of global multispectral warfare that has already been successful in reframing our national dialogue so far outside the old Overton window that the window hasn't just been smashed, the frame has been ripped out and moved to the house next door, at the house to the right, okay?
Yeah.
And the impact of this attack on democratic values has been so devastating and so quick that it's sometimes hard to comprehend. And the reason I call it a theocracy is because our government is being taken over by these folks. It doesn't matter that we currently have a Democratic president and slim majorities in both houses of Congress. The takeover is coming through extreme gerrymandering and the buggering of elections in red states. It will take a miracle for Democrats to hold Congress, and Biden's approval ratings are not where they need to be for him to win re-election. So you can count on the fact that if they succeed in taking the reins of power in 22 and 24, we're going to see enforcement of what Michael Flynn is talking about. Not just in terms of making Christianity a state religion, but in terms of really openly codifying white male supremacy as official government policy. Because that's their religion, okay? It's just masquerading as Christianity. And that's the ultimate goal of this disinfo campaign. Theocracy and white male supremacy, make no mistake. So this whole cancel culture psyop that's been raging since 2016 and before was just a warm-up. At the same time as the right has been whining incessantly about cancel culture and their own victimhood, they've actively been canceling not just human rights, but they've also been actively going after the intellectual frameworks that make people care about human rights. The anti-CRT gambit, where they're firing teachers and principals for teaching real American history, is going on simultaneously with a renewed push to take over school boards and purge any literature or curricula that might help kids understand their history or care about human rights or challenge the conservative moral hierarchy at all. While we were worried about passing an infrastructure bill and giving folks paid family leave and childcare, right-wing fascists have been planning and executing 21st century book burnings. This all happened with lightning speed. You can't win a war if you don't realize you're fighting. And that war is raging every day under the radar of most people. They know something's wrong, but they're still clinging to the idea that somehow we can return to a sense of normalcy. The normalcy we had before Trump, before COVID, before climate change started to really bite. They might have thought that the election of Joe Biden was going to return our nation to that sense of calm we had during the Clinton or Obama presidencies, or frankly, I'm sad to say, even during the George W. Bush presidency, as bad as that was. Before alternative facts, before the GOP turned into a full-blown treasonous insurgency. And I have bad news. That's not going to happen. That old America we all grew up in is gone. The America that produced an honest and sincere, no-nonsense statesman like Joe Biden is gone. It's gone forever. And I'm really sad to say this. I've avoided that conclusion for a long time, but it's true. It's what's happening. We all have to wake up and recognize this as a fact. That old America is gone. It won't be coming back. What will replace it is the open question. And a lot depends on how many people wake up, recognize what's happening, and start resisting. And they better do it soon. Most people's concerns, however, miss the real story. They miss that we've crossed a threshold and that a door has closed behind us. People are understandably worried about our nation being divided and the ramped up threats of violence, both toward and by public officials. They're worried about civil war. Some are worried about white replacement. Others are worried about climate. People are worried or possibly enthused about the 400 million guns on America's streets and in people's homes. And it's not just those, but the 40 million new guns that are expected to be sold just this year by the end of 2021. So everyone's worried about a lot of things, and they're freaking out in new and different ways. There's quiet anxiety and hand-wringing by liberals over what we've lost, like decency, a loyal opposition, rule of law. And there are also increasingly public tantrums by conservatives. I think it's fair to say that the shared sense of reality that used to define what it means to be an American is now also gone. Along with it, even the memories of the facts and values we once shared are fading. And I'm not sure that enough people, particularly young people, are even aware of what has been lost and what is still yet to be lost.
It's a lot there. Honestly, I concur with a lot of what you said. We do need to be sober, and we have to realize that we have moved into a new phase. This, the post-war era is over. And we are now looking at a growing theocratic fascist movement in our country that has a great deal of control, not only in the reins of government, but even more importantly, they have control in the culture. They have control in the media, and they're shaping the stories about America. They're shaping who we think we are. For example, with a critical race theory, they're reshaping literally that whole notion of social progress and history, and they're doing it really unabashedly and without much resistance. Even you can see how defensive the left has been to this whole process with critical race theory, and that's just one example. So what we got here is we have, all of this happening in the context of a declining superpower. And whenever you have that in the world, whenever you have a major power that's in decline, there's always these kinds of shenanigans that accompany it. Oftentimes it's war. I mean, we're living in a time now where we have to be very, very sober about what's happening. And I think this is what the interview today is about, what our show is about. Not to be completely doom and gloom here. I think that there is potential for some resistance and some good here, but let's not fool ourselves. It's like the climate issue. It's very parallel to that we talked about last week. We've got to be really honest about how bad it is before we can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, just as we said with climate, right? We know it's dire, and yet we have to have optimism anyway, even if we think that it's ultimately futile, right? Because your optimism is the radical act, and optimism that we can somehow save this country from the forces that are trying to destroy it is a radical act. And I have that optimism, okay? But I think that the reason the left is losing this battle, and we're losing badly, don't even mistake this situation, okay? The fact that maybe Biden can get this third bill passed and, maybe we can get some of these social safety net provisions into law, that's window dressing, okay? Like, we have lost the power, the narrative, the ability to even recognize what's going on. I mean, the fact that Joe Biden has just he's accomplished some of the most consequential legislation that's been passed in a decade, probably since Obamacare, all right? And yet his approval ratings continue to drop because the narrative has been seized by the right wing. Even CNN, and we talked about this a little bit in the guest segment that you're going to hear a little bit later. Even CNN, even the liberal media, even the New York Times, Washington Post, these are the papers of record that normally would have presented a dispassionate look at what was going on, and have gotten all bogged down in what's wrong with Kamala Harris? What's wrong with Biden's approval ratings? Is he failing? These types of questions that just play right into the idea that instead of looking at this as a transformative moment with these bills being passed and all the good they're going to do for Americans, we've got 88% of Americans right now who are extremely worried about inflation. Well, guess what? This whole inflation thing is another psyop, okay? The reality is that we have 6% inflation. We've been used to having 2%. It's not a huge crisis, okay? It's a matter for concern, but the reason for the inflation is not Joe Biden. It's not money printing. It's not social spending as the right is framing it. It's because we just had a pandemic, and the pandemic constrained our supply of goods. And so the prices of the goods that are left over are going up. All right. And this is the reality here, that Americans can't even see good news when it happens. They're prevented from even acknowledging the good news when it's happening.
Well, that's precisely the new world that you are talking about, Sean, where we're living now. We're living in a massive psyop, in a massive game, honestly, to control people's minds. And it's not like that's new. It's always been the case, but it's been augmented at a time I mean, you have this confluence of these new powerful media technologies with declining empire, with all these problems that we're having that we've discussed in this show. They're all coming together to create this crisis. And so, yeah, I mean, thinking that, we're going to pass good policies and that's going to make us win next week is old America. That's old America. It's
old
not
America.
where we're at anymore.
It has nothing to do with it. Like this cultural stuff is, it's everything now. I mean, it comes down to the fact that Republicans have stopped arguing policy. And we should have recognized that when they didn't write a 2020 platform. Right. And we've mentioned this before on the show. They don't care about policy. They are only about power. And even a member of the GOP caucus was quoted recently, I forget the name of who said it right now, but was quoted recently as saying that Kevin McCarthy doesn't believe in anything. And this is the would-be Speaker of the House. He has no beliefs. It's only about power. And that is the same thing with Trump. I mean, Trump is excoriating Republicans for voting for American infrastructure. He is viciously denouncing them for raising the debt ceiling and not sending the country into default.
And there was that famous quote by McConnell when Obama won in 2009 that we have to make him a one-term president. We're going to deny him everything. It's not about the country. It's about power. Yep. And
this is not new.
No. But I mean, that was a forewarning. That was they should have told us more than it did. People just kind of shrugged it off. It is about power now, and more than anything else. And we need to start thinking in those terms.
Yeah, there is no other lens really when you look at it, because if we can't recognize when a president and a party passes historic legislation to make the American people's lives better, and if we're seeing approval ratings drop 10% anyway, right? What are we? What are we as a nation? Okay. And I want to share a new insight with our listeners that I gained last week about America's decline. And I only gained that insight because I stepped out of my liberal bubble. I did something that some of you might find controversial, or at least not completely in character for a liberal activist. But that's not really what I am anyway. I'm very firmly a post-liberal, as I believe all of us on this show are, in the sense that I do very much see what's happening in our nation and the world in terms of raw power. As such, I do very much, as I said at the beginning of the show, need to live in the world that is, not the world I wish existed. So here's the story. Jillian and I went to a gun store this week to buy a new pistol. It's not a decision we took lightly. I hadn't fired a weapon at all since 2012 or 2013, and we had gone to the shooting range near my house to make sure that the old guns I've owned for something like 30 years were still working, and it turns out that one of them wasn't. I had an old 9mm Ruger that kept jamming on me, and it's basically not a safe or functional weapon anymore. So, by the way, we do want to do an episode about gun policy and about the current state of gun culture in America. So I will save most of what I have to say about the subject of firearms for a future episode. But I did learn a few things being around gun people for the first time in many years, both at the range and at the store, because I hadn't been around them since forever. And first of all, no masks on anyone, not a damn mask in sight anywhere, and a lot of them probably aren't vaccinated. And let me tell you, the gun world has changed in other ways. Those guys are in full-on preparation mode. They all think that there's going to be some serious fighting in America. And they also think that Kyle Rittenhouse is a full-blown American hero. And it's not just some of them who feel that way, it's all of them. There are probably 20 people in the gun store, and as soon as the subject came up, one person shouted, "Is he innocent yet?" Another one shouted back, "That trial is total bullshit." And we were talking about some accessories for the pistol that we bought, and the guy said, "What you see here is what you get. We're not special ordering anything right now. We get what we get. Everything is selling out. There's no ammo available anywhere. Every time the president speaks, I sell more guns. All the manufacturers are running 3 shifts." Okay, this is what this guy said, like verbatim. And that wasn't the only sign of panic buying. Apparently, the computerized background check system is down because it's so overloaded. And they had a phone line open at the store to the background check center the entire time we were there. They were just on hold. And finally, someone got on the line from the state, and they were able to verbally process the day's background checks, which was a stack about a half an inch thick. And this is all very serious shit. We're living through an explosion of weapons sales that exceeds even what happened under the Obama administration, we've blown through any checks or balances or frankly any liberal fantasies about controlling guns. There's just no way to unring that bell. If anything, the Supreme Court might be poised to expand gun rights further, even beyond the Heller decision, by limiting the kinds of regulations states can enforce. It's a nightmare. So I'm really heartbroken about this. I'm someone who really doesn't like the idea of living in an armed society. I would like to see comprehensive national gun control. I don't want to have to worry about defending myself or my loved ones from crazy armed Trumpers or just armed shitheads in general. I would absolutely turn in my guns if the laws changed. But Elvis has really left the building on that one, let me tell you. With this many guns on the street, you can be sure that there's a high chance that on any given day, you're going to encounter multiple people who are carrying a weapon in your car, on your bike, in the store, a restaurant, wherever you are. You're surrounded by armed shitheads, and a lot of them have concealed carry permits. So you won't even know who's prepared to kill you. That's just a fact.
Yeah. I consider what is really being largely defined as extremists today in our society. Again, the right controls the discourse. What is extremist and what is not? Promoting equality, accountability that comes from social justice principles, that's the extreme position now. That's the ones that you have to be careful of. And the freedom to carry an assault weapon in a public setting is not. The helplessness around the gun issue is also telling. Think about how completely and totally toothless any of our institutions are to improving this issue. The having more gun control and regulation just isn't in the cards. It hasn't been for a long time. Really, what else do you see that in the world? Where do you see guns so free and the inability for a society to get guns under any form of control whatsoever? Only in failed states, in places where warlords and drug cartels have effectively more power than the government. In our case, here, it's that the discourse has the power, the right-wing discourse, and it has taken control and it supersedes anything else. The gun issue is emblematic of the downfall of our society. I'm sorry to have to say that our institutions are so helpless to do anything about gun violence should be a dire warning to all of us. Something is truly wrong.
Something is incredibly wrong. And speaking of guns and craziness, now we have to talk about this verdict in the Rittenhouse trial. And it's just like a gut punch this morning to hear that. And just heard it just minutes before we got on here to tape the show. And it's also that we also have to talk about the McMichael Bryan trial, okay? And I want to stress that it's the McMichael Bryan trial, not the Ahmaud Arbery trial, okay? Even though that's how the media is reporting it. As usual, the headlines telegraph the bias that somehow the dead black guy is on trial. I mean, think about it. I went down Google, okay? I did a Google search about for Ahmaud Arbery, and every single article, Ahmaud Arbery trial. And it is 3 white men who are on trial for killing Ahmaud Arbery, not Ahmaud Arbery, okay? And so it's just, here we go again. This is the theocracy of disinformation, where the information control is so total that, number one, the victim doesn't recognize that their mind is being colonized, and there is no alternative viewpoint, right? I mean, I didn't see one headline anywhere talking about the McMichael Bryan trial, all right? They're not even named. It's like, we don't even know who they are. Like, I had to actually look up their names because I didn't remember.
Yeah, that's the insidious part of this. It is what it has become normal versus what used to be normal. I mean, the idea that we're naming these cases based on the person who's murdered and just ignoring the murderers, that is actually a new thing. And also with the trial with Kyle there, I mean, an untrained, radicalized 17-year-old armed with high-powered rifle took it upon himself to become a defender, quote unquote, of property, and threw himself in the middle of these really tense protests that were going on at the time. What the heck is happening in our society? What's going to prevent this? the acquittal will certainly lead to more vigilantism and death. Now, I wasn't there. I wasn't in the courtroom. I don't know the details as they played out and I'm not going to second guess any of this. Although what I will say is that the consequences of this acquittal are just going to make things all that much worse, because the one thing about the law system, right, the justice system, is to try to prevent more crimes, right? Prevent them. And you had a third of the population, right, calling this kid a hero, and now they've been vilified and they've been justified in their beliefs. And we're going to see consequences to that.
Remember, Joe, you and I have a view of justice that is restorative justice, right? We believe in consequentialism, utilitarianism, best outcomes. These people don't feel that way. They see justice as promoting their own team. They see justice as punitive for punishing the villains in their narrative. And it doesn't matter. There's no equal rule of law. There's no best outcomes for them. It's only, did our guy win or did he lose? And it's the same thing with loyalty, like to Trump, right? They're purging people who aren't loyal to Trump out of the Republican Party. And they're purging anyone who would ever, call for, if you were a Republican and you call this verdict unjust, you're going to be out of that party, because basically, to be in that party, you have to swear allegiance to that party, right or wrong, no matter what. And that's what we're really looking at.
Well, I mean, here we are, where now it's normal for a 17-year-old to have an assault weapon and to take it across, I don't know how far he went, miles and miles from his home, and to say, and then to kill 3 people, and 2 people, I guess, and then to claim self-defense. I mean, it was pretty premeditated. He went there. It's not like these people came into his home or his property and were threatening him. He went to a very, very tense situation with an assault rifle and basically went to war. And that's what he did.
He was the only one to shoot anyone, right? If they're talking about this protest being violent, he was the only one who really committed violence here. And this is the other thing, because I was talking to the guy at the gun store, and he was just going on and on and on about how it was his right for self-defense. And I'm like, why was he there? Like, why did he put himself in that situation to where he would need to defend himself? What was the point of that? And it doesn't matter. They're not looking for a rational argument.
No.
They're looking to stack up talking points and rhetoric to justify basically a white male supremacist society. And as I mentioned on Twitter this morning, don't think that your white skin will protect you from murderous fascism, people. I mean, the 3 people who were shot were white, and you've got the white supremacist party calling them expendable, right? That's what's going on here. So the Nazis will throw you under a bus, even if you're white, people.
And by the way, I just want to say that if you go back in history and you look at the Weimar Republic in the 1930s, and you had this vigilantism by what would become the brown shirts in the Nazi party, but people like that, they went to trial at that time, while there was still some semblance of a democracy and a civil society there. They went to trial, and what defense did they use? Self-defense. They cried on the podium like Kyle did. They used the same rationale, the same logic to try to escape the consequences. Then, right? This is we're seeing something here that's very ominous. That's all I can say.
If you're in the right, you don't need to play on people's emotions. Okay, if you have the moral high ground, you don't need to play on people's emotions. And it is absolutely not a coincidence that we see this now whenever any white male is called to account for anything. They break down and they freak out and they cry. I mean, Brett Kavanaugh, a Supreme Court justice nominee, breaks down in front of Congress when he's called to account for his past, okay? And it wasn't just Rittenhouse who broke down on the stand. It was also McMichael. McMichael broke down on the stand and cried, okay? The guy who murdered Ahmaud Arbery in cold blood, and he's crying and claiming that it was the most traumatic experience of his life. It's like, this is classic, and it's the entire country's being played by this. You know, the commentary today after the verdict was basically about technical issues involving self-defense and not about this gross miscarriage of justice and what this might mean for race relations, for the ability of anyone to get justice in this country in the future. So,
well, we have an explosion of guns, right? People are buying them in record numbers, and we have the courts not saying that it's okay to kill people. So,
yeah.
Not a good equation.
I mean, I fully expect there will be some either an appeal to this verdict, or there will be some kind of federal action taken on this. But our Justice Department is not doing its job. Prosecutors didn't do their job. That judge it was a complete kangaroo court. I know you say you don't want to question what happened there. And I wasn't in the jury room. None of us were. But the fact is that I don't blame the jurors either, because they were given bad instructions. There was a farcical trial put on that they were asked to participate in. And I don't think that an honest jury could have come out with a different verdict at that point, because they were told to disregard a lot of things that otherwise would have been considered evidence.
That's true.
So the jury instructions were basically what sealed the deal there. All right. Well, I think we have covered pretty much the events of the day and what I wanted to talk about. And I want to introduce our guest segment now, which is with Jim Stewartson. And I don't have a bio for him, but let's just say that I don't think he needs much introduction. He is a huge Twitter anti-fascist activist and anti-disinformation activist. And I really had a great conversation with him. And I think that you all will start to really understand better what is going on here, because these two events are connected. All right. This disinformation and what happened today are intimately connected, and Christian theocracy. So let's listen. Jim, welcome to the Radical Secular Podcast. I'm so glad we found time to do this.
Likewise, I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, you're someone who digs deeply into these various right-wing rabbit holes and finds connections that a lot of other people miss. And we just recently met on Twitter when you posted that Michael Flynn clip with my mother. And since I've been following you, I've really gained a much deeper perspective into the enemies of democracy that we're facing. And we also had a chance to talk on Zeb Shalev's Narrative TV. And I've also noticed that you and Heidi Kuda and Sean Connor and High Fidelity have started a new podcast called Radicalized.
Indeed.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Sorry for stealing the name. It came up with it before we met, but I think the fact that both of us chose that word speaks to the moment that we're in.
Totally. Well, nobody owns that word, and I think it's great. We really all do need to be radicals, and because that's what the moment calls for that. I really enjoyed your first episode, and I just wondered, without necessarily going through a total recap, if you can give our listeners a brief background as to who you are and how you got into the position of what really amounts to cutting edge anti-disinformation activism, and what your plans are for the Radicalized Podcast.
Sure. I'm just a guy. I've been in technology, building games, more or less, fancy, interesting ones. I've been, I've pioneered a few things along the way. And one of those things that I was really proud of before was a thing called alternate reality games. And alternate reality games are these big kind of viral experiences that people would go through online and also crossing into the real world. They'd go on scavenger hunts and try to find a phone buried in a cake somewhere. And, we'd show people online, or we had one that we did for Halo where we delivered this huge story over payphones and then kind of repiped the story back onto the internet. that. And it was really fun. It was a way to get people kind of interested in how the internet might tell stories, right? That's how we kind of thought of it. And we did notice one thing, though, that it was very powerful, and that if you didn't give people the proper guidelines and boundaries, that they would, and we used to say to each other, drive themselves crazy, trying to find a puzzle that didn't exist, or trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have a solution.
Right.
And in game design, those are terrible things, right? You don't, and so immediately whenever we saw that behavior, we thought, oh, okay, we're just learning here. Let's put a guardrail there to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? You don't want people to drive themselves crazy and get themselves into bad cycles of behavior and obsessive cycles of behavior. And that's what we saw. And so, like any other, kind of medium, it can be abused. And 15 months ago, I'd been sort of tracking QAnon. I had kind of an idea it was like an alternate reality game. But August 2nd, 2020, an old colleague of mine from the alternate reality game space sent me an article, and I took a look at it and I went, wow, holy shit, that sure does sound like an ARG. Let me go take a look. And within 3 days, I was completely radicalized and identified Mike Flynn as a fascist who was either in charge of or would be in charge of QAnon. And for literally every single day since then, I have been, researching and working with colleagues and yelling my brains out on Twitter. And so the idea of the podcast is to hone that in a little bit, give it some human face, and just be able to talk about these things openly and with the level of urgency that I think we agree it requires. So, I've found my colleagues on the podcast, basically, it's been a large game of Survivor since I started, lots and lots of people sort of getting excited and involved, especially around January 6th. And, it's hard stuff. You get attacked, you get people running literal ops on you and all kinds of horrible shit. And, basically the people that I'm with are the ones who managed to kind of hang on this far. So that's kind of the origin story of me and it.
That's very good. And I think I remember very well the article that you're talking about, if it's the one I'm thinking of, and that is just talking about the gamification of propaganda and looking for patterns that aren't there. And I think it was a brilliant article because it really described so much of why this is so seductive for people. And we also know that there was crossover with Gamergate, very much so, into the radicalization of young people. So Gamergate is a whole thing. It, arguably is really the beginning of this sort of latest fascist insurgency in America. Because it radicalized a whole bunch of incels and angry young, right-wing men, and basically used misogyny to create a cult. And all cults need targets, and in this case, the targets were women. And so they spent their time on 4chan, doing memes and getting angry about women. Steve Bannon saw that and decided to turn up the heat and put Milo Yiannopoulos on it and made it worse and worse and worse until people ended up dying. People ended up getting, swatted and all kinds of shit. And that core group of people who started that whole thing is still at the center of all of this stuff, including obviously Bannon, Eric Prince, Mike Flynn, all those guys. You can trace their origins back to 2014, 2015. Yeah, and I think it was interesting what you said about that they got together a bunch of young right-wing angry men. In a lot of ways, I think they may have manufactured a bunch of young right-wing
Indeed.
angry men
That's
because these are just kids, right? These are kids who just are trying to live, and all of a sudden they're being told, "Hey, you're being suppressed. You're right. Men are being censored. Men are being punished for being men," and just kind of whipping up this anger into a frenzy. And a lot of people have gotten caught up in it.
Yeah, there are many vulnerabilities, right, to getting radicalized, and one of them is being disenchanted with your life. And if you're a young male, like, being frustrated about sex is part of life, right?
Yeah.
Like, unless you're, that one annoying guy who's the captain of the football team and get anyone he wants, right, there's a certain level of frustration, right? And so tapping into the extreme end of that is what they did, right? They took the guys who were just really angry and for whatever reason, background, abuse, who knows, they were the ones who were ready to accept the idea that, no, actually the problem is women.
Right. Well, if you get told repeatedly over and over again, hey, you can't talk shit about women, you can't abuse women, you can't rape women, they're going to say, well, yes, I can. I'm going to talk shit about women. I'm going to abuse women. I'm going to rape women. So it's like you're really almost like daring these guys who are already at the point in their lives where they're rebellious and they want to transgress and they want to they want to be recognized as individuals, and you're kind of molding and shaping that in a negative direction. It's really destructive.
It's incredibly destructive, and what they learned is the part that is, I think, most destructive, is that you can brainwash people online, mm-hmm. right? That was the fundamental kind of revolution, if you will, with kind of Gamergate, and going back a little bit further into some other stuff. But it was really Gamergate and 4chan and especially 8chan that created the conditions for the type of radicalization that we've seen.
Yeah. Well, that's all very, very good backstory. But let's get right into the topic of retired General Michael Flynn. In the intro, before you came on, I talked about Flynn's call for one religion in America and how dangerous that was. And you recently tweeted that Michael Flynn is, in fact, Q. Can you explain how you came to that conclusion, and in general, what is so deeply sinister about Flynn?
Yeah, well, let me clarify that a little bit. There is no Q. And it's really important to be very clear about that. Q is a live action role play character. It's a LARP. So that mm-hmm. means that anyone can play it, right? And many people did. I can name 15 people who wrote for Q. But Mike Flynn was always behind it. And if you just look at what it said, what it did, how it operated, it is all part of Flynn's plan to get himself out of hot water for the mm-hmm. For the Russians, but also Flynn declared war on America, and he saw this radicalization online as a way to do it. And he had a huge success in 2016 with this group called MAGA 3X. MAGA 3X is the group that actually started QAnon in terms of writing the first drops. So that was two guys named James Brower and a troll named Microchip. And they worked for MAGA 3X. And MAGA 3X was run by Mike Flynn. So it was Flynn's op. Like, literally the people who started it worked for this group that Mike Flynn was running. And MAGA 3X also was the group that frankly, swung the election to Donald Trump. They ran a whole bunch of those ops, the Huma stuff, all the Wiener emails, not to mention Pizzagate, was all MAGA 3X and Mike Flynn and those white supremacist, guys like Posobiec and stuff running around. And so he had the success in 2016, he was planning on being national security advisor and taking over from the White House. but he got bumped off of there real quick and decided to go online and wage war on America. So Flynn is not Q, because Q is just a bunch of assholes writing stuff to brainwash people, but Flynn is the one that was running it. So if you have to name Q, it has to be Flynn.
Right. Well, and it's just interesting because of how anything is amplified when it's a mystery, right? When it's like the Wizard of Oz. It's like,
that's right.
Any gods or masters or anyone who you can't see and you can't talk to, you can't negotiate with, but someone is speaking for them and delivering, like the Q drops are, they might as well be like dictations, right? From my parents. I mean, totally. It's just information that can't be questioned and information that is like from a mysterious source. Yeah. Tends to it's like you said, in these ARGs, it just drives people crazy. They can't stop looking. It's like a mysterious hum or buzz or or lights in the sky, or
it's compelling.
Something like that.
Like solving puzzles is something people want. So there's a term called apophenia. Yeah, apophenia is a psychological condition that people get into if they're presented with noise without any signal in it. So the classic example is, you used to, back in the olden days, you'd turn on channel 3 or whatever, and you'd get a bunch of snow, right? Mm-hmm. If you sit somebody in front of snow for long enough, they will see shit. All people, right? Literally everybody. Now, the question is, how quickly? How vulnerable are they to it? And, I had a cousin who's schizophrenic, and he would literally sit down in front of snow on the TV and start narrating because it was real to him. He saw it because his mind was trying to make sense of what he saw, and his brain had too many connections going on, right? It was trying super hard, too hard to reach out into the world and make sense of it, right? And so he was able to get stuff out of snow when it totally didn't exist immediately. But everybody has that same vulnerability. If you keep giving people bullshit over and over and over again, they will get into this hyperactive kind of hyper state where they are very, very open and to undue influence and to bad, people telling them things they should not actually do. And so Q deliberately set up this kind of malevolent alternate reality game to increase apophenia, to set up puzzles that could not possibly be solved because they were total nonsense. But if you get people in a community, especially, and the community is very important, you get people in a community together trying to solve something, it almost doesn't matter what the puzzle is because it's fun, because it's interesting.
They'll create something. And it's related also to pareidolia and the seeing of faces and patterns that don't exist. And also, it's funny that you should mention snow because that's an old horror film trope going all the way back to Poltergeist, right?
Exactly. Because it's mysterious. What could possibly be in there, right? And Q was just basically a big fascist snow. So basically, so the other part of it that doesn't get really talked about very much at all and will need to be is the trauma that is intentionally induced in people when they go searching for the solutions to these bullshit puzzles. So the way it works is, like, you hear from your friend, ooh, there's this mystery. There's missing kids. What is that? Let's go check it out. It feels very transgressive, but only very mildly, right? And then suddenly they start getting videos, and these videos are weapons of mental mass destruction. They are these long, droning, hypnotic things that start to give you all kinds of scary feelings, and it monotones and drones, and then they crash in with a bunch of horrendous, like, violence against kids, especially because that is the most traumatic thing people see, especially moms. And they show a whole bunch of really horrendous shit, violence that dissociates me, and I can see, I've seen everything, literally everything.
Yeah, you're immune to it, and it affects you. It's interesting because I don't know if you saw in the first season of Star Trek Picard, there was that trope about the Romulans, and they had this like, it was a mind video that they would play for people. And it was about a takeover of artificial life forms that were going to take over and destroy the universe. Right. And it created such trauma that these people were immediately radicalized and ready to go kill. Yeah. And I thought that was a very good metaphor that they used in that show, and that is really pertinent to our times right now.
Trauma is the root of all of this. Ultimately, I mean, like, the country has been traumatized for at least 5 years now, straight. Like the amount of horrible shit that everyday Americans, much less me, who wallows around in it all the time, are subjected to is just unbelievable, right? How many horrible, cruel, sociopathic things have been normalized, right? From kids at the border to just the Let's Go Brandon, to all this just shit that is designed to rip the morality and ethics away from human beings.
Right, because when you're in a crisis or an emergency, you can overlook all that stuff.
You can, right, when you're in that alert state, fight or flight, like trauma, it'll do it.
Well, I want to dig right into tactics, and the title of our episode is A Theocracy of Disinfo. And on the surface, it might not seem like that the old dominionist drive for Christian theocracy, which goes back 100 years or so, and this modern torrent of disinformation are related. But my central theme for the episode is I really think they are intimately related, and that they are just different branches of the same tree. And I'm wondering if you agree, and if so, can you explain how this movement works and why it's been so devastatingly successful?
Yeah, well, the dominionists, it's all doomsday ideology, right? At the end of it. If you look at the way people get radicalized, it almost always has an apocalyptic doomsday component to it. QAnon is absolutely no different. It's about satanic pedophiles eating your kids, and we have to go.
Doesn't get worse.
We have to go execute them right now, or otherwise your kids are going to die, like that, you know. And dominionist is not really that different, right? It's like, you better do exactly what I tell you, you know, and help me create this theocracy. Otherwise, you are a heretic and you are going to hell for eternity. And so are your kids. And, you know, it's not a different way of kind of traumatizing and intimidating people into believing things that are against their own interests, right? And so the interesting thing, though, is that the Dominionists and QAnon are no longer different at all. Like, Mike Flynn is in the CMP. He's a member of the Council for National Policy, which has been probably the most destructive Dominionist terrorist group, you know, in the last 40 years. And he's a card-carrying member of it, and cute. So there you go, right there. Like, there is a confluence, and you know, like, theosophy, and especially, you know, fascist versions like Cut, like, they use all the same basic fear tactics and the same apocalyptic shit as standard Dominionists do, right? Jim Jones was a Dominionist. Your mom was a Dominionist, like, you know.
Yeah. Well, we thought, and I believed at the time, that we were literally, that our job was to go and build a new golden age civilization, that after the purification of the earth with this nuclear war, that we were going to be the ones to survive. We needed to have guns, of course, to take care of anybody who was, you know, coming after us. But in the end, we were planning to, this renewal, this idea of renewal for the earth, that we would be back to the land, we would be farming, we would be worshiping God, we would be doing everything the way that it was supposed to be, and all of this corruption would be washed away by the nuclear fire. And so, and then it got to the very end where she told all of us that we were being directly targeted by the Soviets. That our shelters were being to be targeted directly with a missile by the Soviets because they were in cahoots with the forces of darkness, and they knew that the real mission was to destroy us personally, because we were the ones who were responsible for bringing in this golden age, and their job was to prevent that. So it's very similar.
Absolutely.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, and you can go to. I mean, thank God it turned out less violent. With you and your mom, but it's the anniversary of Jim Jones. He was also the same doomsday bullshit. Same with Waco with David Koresh. That was just an apocalyptic, like version of Seventh Day Adventism. And like people, they all need a way to make you fear for your life and to make you think that if you don't do what they say, you're going to die. And
right. Well, and the worst of them actually, if the apocalypse doesn't happen, they bring it about, like Jim Jones or like the solar temple people who, they took poison.
Now these guys, these fascists are actually trying to do it to the world. Right. Like it's funny. It's confusing to me for a little while before I realized why they are so against global warming. I mean, against doing anything about global warming. They are for global warming. They want the earth to be a ball of fire. Like they think that that's a sign that it's coming. They really do.
Yeah.
Like, and so all the the bullshit about how it's hurting our economy and shit like that. That's just all nonsense. It's a pure lie designed to cover up for the fact that they want it. They like it. They are interested in the apocalypse coming. And,
not only that, they're planning on making a lot of money from it on the way down.
Well, that goes, don't get me started on that, because that's Peter Thiel's whole thing he set up his entire organization, which is substantial, very substantial, to profit from suffering and death. That is what he is. He capitalizes on the more people die and suffer. And that comes from his own weird cult that he's in with a guy named René Girard, pardon me, who is his professor at Stanford and believed that humans were violent by nature and that there was the only way that you could get to a better situation is through violence.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen a lot of violence, but we've also seen civilization curtail a lot of violence, and the violence has dramatically declined through cooperative efforts and governments and civilization and all that kind of thing. And they're just trying to break all that down. And they're really feudalists, is what they are. They really kind of long for these hundreds of years long wars that they used to have in Europe before Europe really civilized, and that's kind of what they're wanting to go back to is feudalism,
monarchism. Like these guys, the especially the super rich ones, like they really believe that they should survive. They should be the among the elite few that survive once and get rid of all the rest of these sort of insects that are polluting their earth.
Yeah. And well, who's going to serve them though? Who's gonna wait on them hand and foot? I mean, it's this is what they don't think about.
They have enough money that it doesn't matter. and for a long time, they're right. But eventually, they'll run out of people to do stuff for them.
Well, Peter Thiel just bought a huge mansion in Washington, and I was kind of commenting like he didn't do that to watch his priorities be defeated in Congress. He's planning on taking over Congress.
He may be running. He may run for president. It would not surprise me at all.
Or Flynn. Flynn could run for president.
Flynn's different. Flynn believes, and I more and more I look. I think Flynn genuinely believes that he is some version of the Messiah, probably Archangel Michael.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it definitely identifies with him. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Republican Party in general as it sort of relates to all this. And they've been going more and more all in on supporting these outrageous statements, these cults, these apocalyptic ideas that used to be on their fringes. And there was a time when conservatives used to denounce their own, like if they crossed the line into racism or sexism or outrageous statements, like when Richard Murdoch 10 years ago talked about rape being a part of God's plan, he lost. But that was really a preview of what has now become mainstream Republican doctrine. And these days, the Republican Party is firmly engaged in a purge of anyone who doesn't support these outrageous statements and actions. And it all frankly just seems like a giant trolling effort. But it's very serious. And they're just constantly trolling anyone who supports justice or rule of law. I mean, Liz Cheney, she just got voted out of the Republican Party in Wyoming. They just censored
Prince's Ranches, by the way, which is not a coincidence. We can talk about that later. But
yeah, well, this is the point: is these guys have they've taken over, and if they take over Congress, then Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar get their committee seats back, and there's no accountability.
I mean, really is. There's not only no accountability, but they will continue to destroy a democracy from the inside out. I mean, they say that, they're open about that now. Look, the GOP is no longer a political party. And America right now, at least, is post-political, in my opinion. There's no politics anymore. There's no Republicans anymore. I get very frustrated when people refer to political backlash or something like, oh, the Justice Department didn't do that because of the political backlash. Horse shit.
Yeah,
who's going to, there is not a single thing that anyone can do that is going to change anybody's opinion over there. The thing that has to be done is to shore up democracy so that we can help the people who've been hurt by a cult and get our country back together.
The fact that there is this extreme gerrymandering and it's allowed and it's not questioned, where you can get 51% of the vote, but win 80% of the seats in the state legislature. How is that even possible? How do they get away with it? And this is what I have not understood. I know there are lawsuits, and I know that sometimes these lawsuits are not, they don't win. The Supreme Court allowed it when it comes to these things.
Listen, the Supreme Court has cult members on it, right? They're all Federalist Society people. They're all like 6 of the 9 justices are Catholic. Nothing personal against Catholics, but what the fuck? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Except
for the fact that the Federalist Society is actually the one that's choosing who goes on the Supreme Court, and they now have 6 of them or whatever.
Well, they kind of walk the line, right? Because you can't, the Constitution says that, the Establishment Clause, you can't have religion in government, but then they start these societies like the Federalist Society that are explicitly designed to implement, Catholic principles or
you're also not supposed to do
anti-democratic principles.
Church. And they do that.
And the Johnson Amendment, right?
All day long, every single day. I tweet about it constantly. It's like, it doesn't even faze me anymore, but they're up there just straight up doing political gaslighting. Like it's.
Yeah, well, and it used to be that there was some talk when they would do this that like, you might get your tax exemption jerked, or we should tax the political churches. And now that's just, it's just open season.
There's
at this point.
There's no like concerted effort to really crack down on any of this stuff, which is the part that, I can't get my head around and is upsetting. I think part of it, honestly, is just there's a desire by people, especially establishment politicians, to go back to the way things were. Like to have a justice department that's completely independent of anything else, right? That's a nice idea, but it's not going to work right now. What we need is a justice department that is going to save fucking democracy, not do anything illegal whatsoever. There's nothing illegal about it. It is not a law.
No, just enforce the law, right?
Only. That's what matters. We're not enforcing the law in order to protect norms, which is ridiculous. Think about like the laws are more important than the norms. So if you gotta go past the norms to enforce the law, do it. We have got to start getting real about this and stop worrying about shit like the Justice Department. It looks like it might be biased. Fuck that. It should be biased.
No, it's like this is the last chance, really. I mean, if you can't get these guys under control now, it's certainly not going to happen under a future Republican president, whether that be Trump or Flynn or Mike Pompeo.
If they make significant gains in 2022, even I'm worried that there's no coming back from it because you get a majority in either house. And nothing will happen. There will be no legislation, period, for 2 years. So he will Biden will have no accomplishments to point at, and nobody is being held accountable. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen is things are going to devolve and get worse. And then 2024 rolls around and even more of this shit starts kicking in. And, it's a recipe for America to not be America in 2025.
Well, that's it. And I want to turn now to the absolute savaging of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that's happening in mainstream media. It's not just Fox and also the horrible polling. It seems like the more Biden accomplishes, the more his numbers drop. And I've counted at least 5 major articles in so-called liberal media in the past week, just viciously criticizing Kamala Harris for her office being in chaos. Or there was another one that said, it's hard to screw up being vice president, but doggone it, she screwed it up. It's like we're in some kind of alternate universe where no matter what happens, no matter how good they are, nobody's giving them credit for their historic accomplishments, which have occurred against the absolute vicious onslaughts of right-wing disinformation and insanity. And Americans elected, 80 million Americans elected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be the cleanup crew for the Trump disaster. And now it seems like they're hanging them both out to dry. And if I have to read one more damn story about inflation or gas prices or Thanksgiving dinner and how hard it is to get food or how Biden's mental competency is being called into question, I'm just going to swear off reading the news because it's crazy making. What do you think is going on? Is this part of the right wing psyop? How do they do this?
It is absolutely part of the right wing psyop. It's all there's a certain amount of just natural tendency of people to want to both sides things, especially in in the media, because let's be honest, they get money from there being two sides. If you don't have two sides to an issue, then you're just yelling about stuff, which honestly is what they should be doing. But they're used to this ping pong tit for tat thing. And so they basically make shit up, or they go and they pick up on some of these right wing ops that, about Biden being incompetent or too old or senile, or about Kamala being a bitch or whatever, right? But that's all straight out of out of Telegram, and it just gets sort of whitewashed and vaguely softened for something like Politico to just write some bullshit that gets people like me and you upset, which they want, and gives red meat to everybody else. So,
Well, it's funny because if you listen to like the CNN panel, like I was listening to their post-mortem after the last election where Glenn Youngkin won in Virginia, and it was just horrible. I mean, they were piling on to Democrats. It's almost like when Trump was in office, they would pile on Trump, and now that Biden's in office, they're just piling on to Democrats and talking about how we're failing in our messaging. We shouldn't have brought up.
There's blame there. The Virginia was won by a psyop. By the anti-CRT psyop that was inserted into especially Loudoun and Fairfax counties, which are the most populous ones, right in the couple weeks before, and got a bunch of latently racist white people to get scared about education and their kids. That's what it was.
Right.
And I'm sorry to say that. I love Virginia. I lived in Maryland for a long time, but there are a lot of latently racist people there. Some outright
no, I was
racist.
Born in Virginia.
And, and
totally.
It's on that kind of Mason-Dixon line where there are people people, it feels like people are trying to move on, but there's still some of that left over. And this PSYOP, this anti-CRT CRT is a graduate level legal course. It's fucking bullshit. There is no CRT at all anywhere remotely close to a school. And they flipped white suburban women by 15 points. And that was the difference between victory and loss. Now, can you blame Democrats for that? No. But they didn't have a good candidate. Let's be honest. Was not happy.
And they didn't have a good comeback. The Democrats don't have a good comeback.
They bought into it. And by buying into it, they let TV networks and stuff buy into it as well. Right? Like I saw, on CNN the other day, they were interviewing a woman who was clearly a cult member and talking to her as if her issues about CRT were somehow valid and an issue that was a thing, and was treating it like a tit for tat. And I'm like, Jesus, what is wrong with you? This woman's brainwashed. She's sitting in a chair in front of you with googly eyes, like clearly not well, and you're promoting her as if she's just some regular voter. She's not.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, they will both sides anything because that's their bread and butter. Well, we only could do 45 minutes on this because of the segment, but we're getting to the end of that time. And I wanted to ask you, though, what's the most important thing our listeners can do right now to engage in resistance against this slow-moving fascist coup? Because we got to do something. It's hard not to feel that paralysis that I feel every day, that the deck is stacked, and no matter what we say or how we vote, the takeover is just kind of a fait accompli. I mean, what can we do?
It feels that way sometimes. What we can do is first of all, get educated, learn about this stuff. Don't listen to me. Go figure it out. It's really not that hard, especially now. A lot of this stuff has come out. So just make sure you understand what is going on, who the players are, and how things like psychological operations work, and why cults work, and how undue influence works, and how trauma works. The most critical thing that people can do is understand what the situation is we're in, and then do whatever the right thing is for you and your family and the people around you. The other thing you can do is scream your ass off at our leaders in our government to do something, to get off their asses and, follow along with the, people like you and many others who are out here yelling, trying to make things better by educating. The other thing is to not be so radicalized that you can no longer have compassion for people who have been victims of undue influence, right? People can get out of these things. Cults make you act in a way that repels other people by design, right? So your loved one, your friend that you used to hang out with all the time and now sends you like trauma videos, like if you can at least stay in touch with them and make sure that to the extent possible, you are human to them. What the cult does is dehumanizes the enemy. It dehumanizes the outgroup, whoever that is. And right now, that's anybody who isn't in the cult. And I say cult in the kind of broadest sense of the word. And so trying to hang on to those relationships without arguing with them, because that just makes you the enemy, but just keeping a human level like relationship at all can help as you learn and hopefully can educate them slowly and carefully, on how they can find their path out, because it always has to be them finding their path out. You can help them though. So that was a lot to pack in a short period, but
no, that's great. That's
compassion
great.
and connection, as hard as it is, if you can do it and it doesn't harm you, then you should.
Yeah, a lot of deprogramming needs to happen in one form or another. I know. It's a loaded word, but I think self-deprogramming is a better way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I've been talking to, and there have been a few people popping up, new people that have gotten themselves out, which is one of the most impressive things you can do, in my opinion, to change your own reality, to get out of that. And I couldn't admire you more, Sean, for your work showing people that it is not a death sentence. It is not somebody who has been taken forever. They need to be shown, they need to be helped on their way out.
No, it's true. And thank you. Thank you for saying that. And we have to talk again. This has been a very sobering conversation, but it's always good because you have a great perspective, and I really appreciate learning from you. So,
well, likewise, Sean. I'm grateful you invited me on. I'm happy to come on anytime, and you'll have to come on our show soon as well. Let's just make it a big family.
I can't wait. Solidarity, right. And I will see you out there.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
Wow, that was a great segment with Jim. I wish we could have gone longer, but we had other stuff to talk about today. How did you feel about that, Joe?
I thought it was a very powerful segment. I think Jim's great. I learned some things from him just in watching this 45-minute clip. And, the things like, thinking about this as obsessive cycles of behavior in games, like these alt reality games, how that has framed sort of the psyop aspect of this gamification of propaganda, I think is really a cool notion. It makes so much sense to me. And, I think about it in particular, what I really struck out was there's an obsessiveness quality to all of this, right? There's this sort of flaw within humanity, within all of us, that we can get really obsessed over things under the right circumstances, not just people who have some kind of mental illness diagnosis, but I think it's true of all of us. Mm-hmm. And then you take and you basically take that weakness along with others, like our propensity to be tribal and all of that, and you game it all in propaganda, and you do it through these incredibly powerful technology, through this social media experience, right? And this is what we're talking about here. And he laid it out pretty well, and I thought he made a really good case of all that. I mean, what makes people vulnerable to propaganda and all kinds of cults throughout history, right? Study it. Then you can work it and make it happen again. I mean, that's literally what's happening. People go through phases of life. Being young, you're very different in your outlook and your hopes and desires. You gain that. Nothing new, right? Evangelicals, for example, can be found in every college campus in the country and around the world. They go after young people because of that, because young people are in that moment in their life where they are wondering about life. They're asking the big questions for the first time. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for hope. And, what they're seeing instead, right, is you're seeing this massive right-wing psyop, right?
Yeah.
With what Jim said, is these live action role playing characters, these larks playing QAnon and all that, right? And they throw out the mystery, they throw out the accusations, they keep people guessing, and then they add the fear and the trauma, and they add the violence videos, and they throw in doomsday ideology, all this stuff they can just really filter into people's psyche and just grab them and make them really just incredibly vulnerable to these fears and ideas. No, I just think humans need to make sense of things. I think that was mentioned. We need to close the loops, create closure to things, right? So we fill in the gaps. Our brains are designed to do that. And so all you need to do to have a really effective PSYOP campaign is place just enough there to promote the connections that you want to promote. Right? And it's better that way. It's better than telling people straight out what's going on. You let them think that they figured it out themselves, that they're their own ideas, right? Much better, much more powerful. And you can actually, you know what, Sean, you mentioned this before with cryptocurrency. You can see the same thing. These cryptocurrency enthusiasts, they're just obsessed, right? It happens in every single way possible, right? So our higher level of cognition gets overridden by this lizard brain, crusade of emotions, basically.
Well, and it starts out, people can self-brainwash much more easily than someone else can brainwash
Absolutely.
them, right? If they want to believe something, and it's like what I said at the end of the segment, right? We need people to self-deprogram. Nobody can get anyone out of a cult until they want to come out of the cult. That's what it comes down to. The pain of being in the cult has to become greater than the pain of leaving the cult. And trust me, there's a lot of pain. When I left my cult, it was devastating. I mean, I literally had to put myself back together over the course of a year or 18 months. I didn't even know what I was alive for. I had no idea what my purpose was in life. And I had to start from ground zero and build myself up with a sense of, and it was really interesting because when I was in the cult, everything was for the masters, for God, right? And I drew this chart for myself, and I put it up on my mirror because I was really struggling from day to day after I got out of the cult. And what it basically involved was building a sense of reciprocity with society. I felt like I really wanted to contribute something to society. And that was not all of my efforts when I was in the cult were toward the cult's goals. And what we were told was the divine plan or what needed to happen in the world. But for me, this was okay, I want to find something that I can do where I feel like what I'm being paid is for value received. I can make a contribution that actually justifies my existence, right? And it was a very much of a shift. And I think this is the only way I can relate to it, because when I left the cult, it was also for that same reason that I felt that my family and my life was not valued. And in order for me to find that value, I had to get out of this paradigm that really reduced and eliminated human concerns to a great degree.
Yeah.
And so that was what it really was. That's what pulled me out of it, was understanding that I valued myself more as a human being and what I could that I could find value in making that contribution. And I think that this is the power of this cult that is sweeping the world and sweeping everybody's brains right now. It is telling them things that they want to hear.
Yeah.
And
honestly, I mean, there's such a psychological quality to all of this. And I think Jim's point about having some compassion towards people who are in this cult, and especially those who are young, is a valid one. I mean, if I think myself, the loneliness people can feel, the isolation, the alienation, which, by the way, is a real huge part of our capitalist culture, right? The commodification of everything, the hyper-individualism and all of that. That kind of disconnection makes you very vulnerable, very, very vulnerable. You're grasping out for anything that's going to make you feel better. And so here comes these guys, and they come on YouTube and entice young boys to hate women, like in QAnon, or it's if I was 16 or 17 and I was exposed to it, what would have happened to me? I don't know. I can't say. right? I'm certainly not arrogant enough to believe that I'm immune to any of that, or was when I was 17. But although I do remember that I was really enticed by an evangelical group, and I eventually rejected them at that age.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is, like, we have to think of this as human vulnerabilities. And I think that we need to fight hard, but at the same time, we don't want to fall into the trap of, you completely fall into our primitive brain and demonizing everyone and falling into these hardcore, us versus them mentality. I think we need to figure out a way to do both, right? To be really strong and really effective and fight, but at the same time to be better than our base nature.
Well, that's just it, though, okay? And it's not a matter of demonizing these guys, but by their actions, they have painted themselves. They have self-identified as a kind of barbarian, right? There's a barbarism to it. And I don't think that if we want to keep civilization, we can't give any quarter to barbarism. And so it does, and it's tough when it comes to family and friends and your circle, because as Jim said, you got to keep people close. You can't constantly argue and fight with them and expect them to ever come out of it, because that just drives them farther into the cult. And it's because it's like with me, when we were at Church Universal and Triumphant, okay, when we were attacked in the media, we just circled the wagons and we just became more convinced of our own righteousness. And I didn't think I was crazy at the time. And it took actually getting to that point where the pain I was experiencing in the cult was worse than than what it took to get myself out. That is the only way I left, and it took many, many, many years to get to that point. So that's why I am not terribly optimistic as to this ending well. And no, I have to keep that I have to keep that optimism as the radical act,
Well, I'm not either. I'm not optimistic. I am hopeful. Again, I want to make that distinction there. I think optimism is based on ideas and a lot of it's rationality, right? We look at things, we assess the situation, but hope is really about sort of trying to survive and persevere and figure out an effective strategy to fight back. And hope is really more about energy, right? Having energy, right? Because hopelessness is lack of energy. Hope is having energy. And that's what we have to think about is, absolutely, we don't want to give quarters to any of this bad behavior. That's absolutely true. But it's kind of like, if you look at a tiger, the tiger has very sharp claws, and and it can kill you. And you just have to you have to understand that. But it doesn't mean that you have to. You also can think about, well, you have to look at the nature of the tiger as well. And young people, especially, certainly there are people that I have no compassion for, in the sense of they really are like the Michael Flynns, people like that are just causing all this grief, right? And the real, puppet masters, no, I have no compassion for them. But, I think
these people, they see the world teetering on the edge one way or the other. And in service of their own personal power, they're giving it a kick or a push to fall off the edge, and they don't care. And that type of mentality cannot be reasoned with.
No, it cannot be reasoned with, and also we need to we need to stop them and then not give them quarter, right? Yeah. Like you said.
And I think a lot of people, a lot of people may be in various stages of denial as to where we are and what this moment demands. And I wanted to say, because I know we've talked about this in the past, Joe, about your family's coming out of difficult circumstances, and we. White Americans, whether you're immigrant or whether you're born here, doesn't matter. We white Europeans in the post-war period from 1945 to, let's just say, 2016, if we want to put a button on this era, have been among the most privileged people in the history of the world. There's been about 100 billion humans that have lived in all of human history, and this 1 or 2 billion of us, have been the luckiest, the most pampered and privileged, the most free, and I just why do we think that we're special? Like, if you can imagine in Weimar Germany and in all of Europe, really, in France at the time, before the rise of Hitler, there was a thriving culture, a thriving, intellectual culture, art and music and dance and theater and film. Okay, it was all happening pre-World War II. And all of those people got dragged through this same horse shit that we're starting to get dragged through, of having neighbor turn against neighbor and having, and having brown shirts and having to be suspicious of everyone and having to be armed. And, when I think about it, it's like this bothers me. I'm depressed by it. But at the same time, why would we think that we weren't subject to these same laws? We've gotten complacent. We don't understand what we're up against. And it's time for us to recognize that we may be looking at a true repeat of that history. And to really meet the moment, we have to meet the moment. We can't just sit here and wring our hands and go, why is this happening? We have to meet the moment.
Yeah, we have to accept where we are, that the post-war period is done, and that we're in a decline, and that we have this rising fascism, this rising theocracy, climate change, all these other issues. We have to accept that this is the moment that we are in, and we then can act on that truth, because denying it isn't going to be helpful. At the same time, we want to be strong and vigorous, and we want to be hopeful and energetic, and find community and find connections and figure out how to do this. It's not just about buying our own guns. I mean, I have nothing against that, actually. I don't own a gun, but maybe I will at some point, but that's not the issue. But also to be connected to other like-minded people that are also interested in a better world, like we're trying to do in this show, right? To reach out, to talk to people, to make these linkages that can then be very valuable. We will all need each other. We will.
Yeah.
More than ever.
All we have is each other, and we have to really start thinking about what that means in a practical way to band together as a community of people who we're on team civilization. We want this to continue. We want science to continue. We want, art and music to continue. We want our kids to be free to enjoy the same freedoms that we all enjoyed in the 1945 to 2016 period. Okay. And that's our fight. That's the only thing worth fighting for, as far as I'm concerned.
We have so much to lose still. We really do. We've lost some. We have. We definitely have lost some, but we have so much more we could lose. That's the other thing. I mean, I have a gender non-binary child. What would their life be like if we had a theocracy and a dictatorship in our society, in this country? It would be brutal. I mean, brutal. And people of color, women and their reproductive rights, right? And even, who knows, their workplace rights, right? The rights so many rights that women have earned just recently, right? Only in the last few generations. This is, I mean, for you've had millennia of oppression, and for the last three or four generations, you've had some liberation. It hasn't been long, right? Those rights are threatened. And people have to realize what we're fighting for here and what the stakes are and how much, we've already fallen into this grand pit that we're warning about. We're well in there. Yeah,
well, hopefully for our listeners, this show has been enlightening to help identify these patterns of disinformation and oppression that we're seeing. And so, anything else you have to add, Joe?
Well, I would recommend watching some more Star Trek.
Yeah, that's always a good idea. I mean,
keep the faith in humanity.
Yeah, we can overcome this. The question is, will we? And that's our show for today. Remember, if you like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, support us on Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. We also publish new articles weekly in our journal at theradicalsecular.com. I'm Sean Prophet. Thank you for being here, and remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.
The Radical Secular Podcast is written and produced by Christoph Defo, Sean Prophet, Joe Okipinti, and Drew Scott. Artwork and design by Tim Stetner. Post-production and theme music by Sean Prophet. Special thanks to our support team, Lindsay Brightman, Jillian Sky Jacobs, and Lori Field Okipinti.